Ooh. Okay, so we are smack in the middle of a discussion about something that happened in this week's parsha, very exciting. Mitzvahs Bikurim, bringing your first fruits. And we mentioned that when you buy a tree, our Mishnah mentioned, there's a dispute whether the land comes along with the tree or not. Either everyone agrees that by one tree, the land does not come with it, and everyone agrees that by three trees, the land does come with it. The dispute is about two trees. Does land come with two trees or not? So if you bring a fruit from a tree that doesn't have land, so the halacha we said was maybe the eino kaira. You bring bikurim, but you don't recite the special declaration, the special verses one is supposed to say when they bring their bikurim and give it to the Kohen. So we're in the middle of the whole discussion. What happens when you bring it? What happens with all the Trum and Meiser issues? So we left off about 6 lines from the bottom, and we said that, what do you mean maybe the eino kaira? How do you bring it and not recite the special declaration? You have to declare, those 5-6 verses to the Kohen. So that the Gemara said, no. When it said you have to declare it, it wasn't ma'akev. Literally, it wasn't preventative, meaning the reading is not going to prevent you from, the lack of reading is not going to prevent you from fulfilling the mitzvah. And that's where we ended off. So we are the second to last word on 6 lines from the bottom. Below, reading is not something which you don't have to do. You can bring it and not read, and you'll still fulfill the mitzvah. Reb Zeira is talking about bringing a korban mincha, a flour offering, and the rule is you have to mix it up with oil, and only 60 measurements. The rabbis declared that that's fitting for mixing. 61 measurements is not fitting for mixing. So says the Gemara there, but if you put 60 measurements of flour and 1 measurement of oil, we know that you don't have to mix it. Even if you brought it and didn't mix it, you fulfill the mitzvah. But that Reb Zeira says, you're right, but you have to do it in the way the Torah said. Since the Torah said it's supposed to be mixed, so you have to at least bring it in the way that it could be mixed. If you bring 60 measurements of flour, 1 measurement of oil, that is not able to be mixed together, so that is not going to suffice. So the Rashbam says that Shekol Davar Shetzivah Kadosh Baruch Hu, everything Hashem commanded to bring, so then you have to do it the way it says. So too by the case of the flour, you have to bring it in a way that it's fitting to be mixed. So too here, if the Torah says you have to read this special parsha, then you have to read the special parsha. You cannot bring and not read. That's not the way the Torah said to do the mitzvah. The Torah said to do the mitzvah is to put the fruits in a basket, bring it up to the Kohen, and declare your special declaration. So what does it mean that you don't have to? Of course you have to read. So on that we said, okay, you're right. But we're talking about 2 very interesting cases where even over there, in those cases, the Torah said you don't have to read. What are those 2 cases? The Avad Lehuk Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. We must be going with the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. What did he say? Amar Batzon v'Shagran bi'at shaliach u'mei shaliach b'derech maybe ve'eno koreh. So we have 2 situations. Either you harvested it and you sent the fruits in the hands of a messenger, or the messenger harvested. He harvested for you, picked the fruits, and brought them to Yerushalayim. And unfortunately, on the way, the messenger died, and he had to go and give it to another messenger. So it's a messenger who gave it to a messenger. So what's wrong with that? My time, why is that not good? You have to take it and bring it. You can't. You have to take it yourself and bring it. You have to go take the fruits from the ground, and then you yourself have to be the one to bring it. So if you appoint a messenger, okay. There's a special parsha in the Torah called appointing messengers, called shlichus. But for him to appoint another messenger, that's already too far. That's no longer you bringing it and you picking it and you bringing it. Yeah. It's interesting. The Rashbam points out that even the shaliach himself, meaning we just gave two cases of where the shaliach died on the way and gave it to another shaliach. But the Rashbam points out even the shaliach himself, he's exempt from reciting the special verses. Why? Because part of those verses are Asher Nasata li Hashem. Hashem gave me the fruits. So the shaliach, he gave the owner the fruits. Okay. Either way, and here you don't have that. So that's going to have to be our case of why you bring, and what the case of where you brought it and you didn't read the special declaration. So he says, Michti, psukin inu likri. So he said, I don't understand. Like, so why can't you read anyways? Meaning, why do you have to go like Rabbi Yossi and make a whole case where you gave it to a messenger and he died along the way and he gave it to another messenger? You go yourself, and they're just psukim. So what? We're in doubt right now if these fruits really, if when you picked fruits from a tree and you don't get the land under it. So the Gemara told us really we're in doubt. Does one get land when he purchases one tree or two trees? So the Gemara says, okay, fine. So you're in doubt. So therefore what? Bring the fruits and declare. What's stopping a person who picked fruits from a tree that we're not sure if he also acquired the land under the tree? So it's a suffix. So okay, so if it's a suffix, just read it. It's just psukim. It's not like you have to do anything, So Amarle Mishum de Mechzi Kishikra. So it's interesting. The Gemara says, no, this looks like falseness. It looks like a lie, because it looks like these are full-fledged fruits that came in a normal situation. But that's not true. We're not sure if these are bikurim or not. They're only suffix bikurim. So to read this parsha that you have to read when you get to the Kohen, it looks like trickery. Looks like dishonesty. Mechzi keshikra. And the Rashbam says, he brings a pasuk from Tehillim, Dover shkarim lo yichaven l'neged einai, that to speak falseness is not what Hashem wants, in front of his eyes, so to speak. So that's why we're not going to read these verses. Did you just have it as all one part of one question?
You mean with Mashasha or?
No, before that.
No, because his appearances.
Okay. So Rav Mesharsha Breder Chia Amar Dilma Asi Lafkinu Mitruma Umaiser. So this is also that people are going to see you and they're going to think that these are for sure 100% bikurim, and when they see you bringing this up, so then they're going to think that that these fruits do not need to be taken off Truma Meiser, because they're going to think that they're normal bikurim. So therefore, we made sure that you knew that these are not normal bikurim; these are really suffix bikurim. And since they're suffix bikurim, so we made a hecker. The Rashbam says we made a system to signify that these are not regular bikurim. So people shouldn't think that you don't have to take off any truma meiser from these bikurim. It's just interesting to me because we said earlier that you do really take off truma and meiser and you give it to the Kohen, but I guess it's not the normal way to give truma meiser. So we make a hecker. We make this distinction that one shouldn't confuse these bikurim that are really only suffix bikurim, they're only bikurim that come from a doubt. They shouldn't confuse them with regular bikurim. It's just interesting because it says that one shouldn't think that you're not obligated to take off truma and meiser, because we had earlier that we asked that question and we answered. He's taking off truma and meiser and giving it to the Kohen. I guess you're not giving it in a normal fashion, maybe. Don't know. Interesting. I don't know.
Footnote here.
Yeah, what is that?
It's pretty long. That was for sure. Danger in letting someone else make a recitation. Doubt.
Does it ask our question? Let's see. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the point is that now when someone else buys 2 trees, according to the rabbis, which is a doubt if the land comes along with it or not. So because of that doubt, they're going to think that they're in general exempt from tithes, I guess, and truma. I guess earlier we were saying that this specific basket of fruits we gave truma meiser to the Kohen, and a guy's going to think that in general the fruits of such a field don't require truma meiser. Okay, either way, that's our case. At the end of the day, we spent the whole amud and a few lines discussing that according to Rabbah, really these fruits that are brought from 1 tree, according to Rav Meir, 2 trees according to the Rabbanan, really when you buy 1 or 2 trees, we're not sure if the land comes along with the trees or not. And therefore, these fruits are going to be considered bikurim, but only bikurim misafek. They're only doubtful bikurim. And therefore, the Gemara concludes that we made a special way to distinguish these fruits from all other bikurim by having you not read the special parsha. Okay. We had in the Mishnah that there are a few differences if you acquire the land under the trees or not. One of the differences was that when you acquire 1 tree or 2 trees, so even if you do not acquire the land according to the rabbis, and therefore the tree that grows even into the seller's yard and is damaging for him, it's blocking the shade from shading his area. Even in that case, he is not allowed to cut down your tree. Because we mentioned it's like an unspoken deal, really. You're giving me no land for the trees, and therefore that even if some of your property is getting disrupted by my tree, but you have to help me out. So fine. Then we mentioned another distinction is anything that grows from the geza, from the root of the tree, from the trunk of the tree, and upwards goes to the buyer. Anything that grows from the shorashim, from the roots, goes to the seller. So now, where is the line between trunk and roots? Where is that? What's the trunk and what's the roots? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, kol sheroa pnei hachama, zeh min hageza, v'she'ein roa mipnei hachama, zeh min hasharashim. If there's a part of the tree that could see the sun, meaning above the ground, that's already considered the geza. That's really the trunk. And if it cannot see the sun, anything that cannot see the sun, which means really under the ground, that's going to be the roots. Okay. So we said, but hold on. V'leichush dilma maska ara sirtan v'amrlei talta zvintali. The isli ara. What's going to happen in this case? If you make this distinction, there might be certain piles of dirt or soil that are going to rise above the tree. It's a very low trunk, and from a distance, I guess it looks like it covered over the tree, and it looks like you have actually 3 trees. I don't know exactly, I can't picture the case 100%, but you have this low trunk, and now you have a lot of dirt that's going to be covering it over, so it's going to look like really 3 trees, and the buyer's going to claim that really you sold him 3 trees, and and therefore he wants the land with it also, because look, it looks like 3 trees, when really you sold him 1 or 2 trees, and the land does not come along with it. So, Ella Amar of Nachman Yikots. So what you could do is, it's not that anything that grows from the trunk goes to the buyer. Rather, the buyer's allowed to go and cut off the part of the tree that grows from the trunk. So we're not giving him anything that goes from the trunk. But if it's bothering him or he needs to or for whatever purpose is good for him, he can cut off the things that grow from the trunk, but he can't cut off the things that grow from the roots. Okay. That's all it means. When our Mishnah said whatever grows from the trunk goes to you, it didn't mean it really goes to you. It just means that you have the you have permission, you have the ability, you have the rights to go and to cut it and burn it as you see fit. So therefore, we avoid this problem of soil getting too high and going over the roots, going over the trunk, and the buyer thinking that he really is owed three trees when he's only owed one. Okay. Omar of Nachman. So Nikitan Dekel Ein Lo Geza. So we learned Naktinan from our rabbis. We have a tradition, it sounds like, that a date palm tree, Ein Lo Geza, has no trunk. So let's see what that means. What does it mean has no trunk? So Amar of Nachman Naktinan Dekel Ein Lo Geza. Savar of Zvid Lememar, what does that mean? Has no trunk. So Rav Zvid thought it meant Ein Lo Geza Lebal Dekel. What it means is that the owner of the tree does not get the trunk of the tree. Why? The cave and the lemichbar uleshoresh. So then kai asuche mesach daite. Since this part is really fit for digging up and unrooting, so therefore the owner of the tree is sort of like a suche mesach daite. He's totally distracted from this, that he doesn't focus on this because it's really meant for digging and uprooting, and therefore see, in a general tree, when it dries out, it's gonna regrow. But over here, the owner of this tree, he's totally it's off his mind, this idea of this trunk, and therefore Rav Zvid thought it meant that he doesn't retain ownership of it. Meaning, when he buys this tree, he doesn't buy the geza of the tree because it's not something which is on his mind. 1 second.
So a palm tree must be uprooted because it dies. Other trees, when they die, you could cut down by the trunk.
Exactly. Since when a guy's buying a tree, so then he who bought the tree, so he doesn't have any rights to things that grow from the trunk of the tree, because since this date palm tree is anyways going to be dug and uprooted, it doesn't replenish itself. So therefore, when he bought the tree, he, so to speak, abandons any thoughts of potentially acquiring produce from the tree. So right now we're thinking that what it means is that you don't get any, that the trunk of the tree is not yours. What it means is, since it's fit, as opposed to other trees that die, they replenish themselves. But this tree, if it dies, you have to go and uproot it. So therefore, it's off his mind, and therefore when he purchases it, that's not part of the purchase. So Maskefla Rav Papa has a question. It says V'hakona shnei ilanos, that you buy 2 trees. Now those 2 trees, you don't get the land under it either, right? 2 trees don't come with the land under it. So that's also dila michbar ula mishrash kaimi. That also is really fit for uprooting. Meaning, if you buy 2 trees and no land comes with it, so what's going to happen if they die out? So they die. So exactly, and they're not going to. You don't have the land under it, so you can't. You don't own the next tree that grows, and yet it still says vikatani diyesh lo geza. So what's the difference between 2 trees that you buy that you don't get the land under it, that the Mishnah says if you get 2 trees, even date palm trees, it makes no difference, right? At the end of the day, any 2 trees you buy, you acquire the land under it. Sounds like even, any tree, even a date palm tree, you will acquire the trunk. And the Mishnah doesn't seem to make any differences. So Elam Rav Papa, what it means is Ein lo geza lebal hadekel. So the owner of the palm tree doesn't have rights to the trunk. Lefi she'ein motzi geza, because it's not going to produce another trunk. Ule Rav Zvid kasha masnisin, and according to Rav Zvid, the Mishnah is a problem. So 1 second. So Rav Zvid said that the owner of the tree has no rights. Owner of a palm tree has no rights to the trunk. On that we asked, our Mishnah says if you buy 2 trees, sounds like any 2 trees, you do own a piece, you do own the trunk, just not the roots. So to that, Rav Papa said that he just said that you don't own the trunk. You don't own the trunk because the trunk cannot replenish itself. Not that you don't own the trunk because you're a suchadaita mineh, because you're it's off your mind, because you're going to uproot it. You don't own the trunk because the trunk cannot replenish itself. So how does Rav Papa fit with our Mishnah? Our Mishnah is talking about all cases. 1 second.
The Mishnah only talks about real trees as opposed to.
So meaning what? According to Rav Papa, then we're not talking about palm trees. We're not talking about palm trees, but if you learn that the reason why a palm tree's trunk doesn't replenish itself is because it's totally off your mind, it's totally not something that you're thinking about because it might get uprooted. So then our Mishnah also has 2 trees which you don't own the land to, that might also be uprooted, and therefore they're off your mind. So what's the difference between that and a palm tree? But I guess if a palm tree is specific that its trunk doesn't replenish itself, so then that's the only case where you won't receive where you don't have rights to the trunk of the tree. And our Mishnah must not be talking about such a case, it's talking about other trees.
So a palm tree, according to here, doesn't produce shoots.
Okay.
So with other trees, it produces shoots as well. So the question is about the shoots. Do you get the shoots, as opposed to a palm tree which only grows from the top? There's no, if you look at a palm tree, you never see a little stick coming up on there.
Okay. So according to Rav Zvid, though, that he made the whole reason about, since it's fit to be uprooted, our 2 trees in the Mishnah, which you don't own the land, are also fit to be uprooted, and yet you still get the trunk. So according to Rav Zvid, the reason why you don't get a trunk cannot be because it's fit to be uprooted. Because in our Mishnah, you only bought 2 trees, you don't own the land under it. So for all intents and purposes, they're also going to be uprooted because you can't do anything with them after they die, because you don't own the land under them. You can't go and replant the tree. And yet it still says that you own the trunk of the tree. So that we said, according to Rav Zvid, masnisin dezavin lechamesh shnin. So according to Rav Zvid, he's going to have to say that that really you bought these trees for 4 or 5 years. That's the case of the Mishnah. And therefore, since you bought the trees for 5 years, so then really you do reserve the right to plant new trees if the original one dies in 5 years. So you made a 5-year deal for these trees, which means that if any tree dies within 5 years, you're going to be able to replant it. So therefore, the uprooting of the tree is really on your mind because you wanted to, and you made a deal, you paid for 5 years of these trees. So therefore, if it would get uprooted, if it dies and you'd have to uproot it, that is on your mind. And therefore, you paid for that. As opposed to a regular palm tree, a regular date palm tree, which is fit to be uprooted, such a date palm tree, you don't acquire the trunk. So basically, according to Rav Zvid, anytime a tree, either because it's a date palm tree, doesn't produce shoots, or because you only bought a tree and not the land under it, so you're not thinking about what's going to be after it dies. You're not thinking about its uprooting and its replanting. And therefore, you would not acquire anything that grows from the trunk. You'd only acquire the fruits of the tree. The Mishnah must be talking about a case where you've acquired the trees for 5 years, and therefore, uprooting is on your mind because you really have the rights to uproot it if it dies within 5 years. Okay. Kana shlosha, kana karka. If you buy 3 trees from somebody, you for sure get the land under the trees. There's no doubt about it. Logic being is basically you've acquired a field of trees. Once you have 3, it's now a field of trees. It's no longer trees. It's now a field of trees. Okay. So the kama. So how much do you acquire the space between the trees if they're totally spread out across the whole field, 300 feet apart from each other? I mean, what's considered acquiring a field of trees? Amar Chia Abba, Amar Yochanan. So harezet kana, when you buy these 3 trees, you're kana tachtehen, you acquire the land under it, u beinehen, between the trees, and v'chutza lehen, and outside the trees. So you acquire the land directly under it, the land that's between the 2 trees. So you have a tree over here and a tree over here. That land in the middle is yours. The land under the trees are yours, and the land that's directly right around the tree. The chutz land, turn the page. Kimelo ora v'salo. Enough that a person who's picking fruits from your tree can stand there holding a basket. So however much space you need. Apple picking, right? So there's a tree with however much space you need to pick and put into your basket. It's that amount of space that you've acquired when you acquire this, so to speak, field of trees. Yeah. Masket Rabbi Dovid. So hold on. Hash the derech ein lo, oru v'salo yesh lo. So Rabbi Dovid is asking that we know from earlier in the parak, and when you buy certain things, so you don't always acquire a path to get there. So in this case, right, if you bought these trees in someone else's field, right? He has a field of 1,000 trees. You bought 3 of those trees, so then you have no way to get there. You did not acquire the path to get through his field. Either you have to jump in the air, or you have to go and buy a path back from the owner. Just like we said earlier on Samach Dalid, that when you buy a pit, or a reservoir or a cistern from somebody, so you have to go and purchase the actual path how to get there. So too here, when you buy 3 trees, that's similar to our case of a pit from earlier, that we view the path how to get there as its own entity, and you have to repurchase, you have to purchase again an additional purchase to purchase the path how to get there. So if that's true, so how come according to Rabbi Yochanan, you get the land around the trees? When it comes to a pit, you acquire a pit from somebody, there's no way to get there. You have to now purchase a path how to get to that pit. And yet by these trees, all of a sudden, all these things come along with it. You get the land outside of the trees. So why should that be true? Yeah, that was the question Rabbi Dovid posed to Rabbi Yochanan. It says derech hash derech ein lo da'arach, they add in da'arach risihi. We view a pathway like its own separate piece of land that you have to acquire from the owner, and yet over here, oru b'sal yeshlo, here you have space to go around the trees and with your basket and just pick things off the tree. So we say, yeah, derech ein lo, a pathway, a whole piece of land that will take you from the beginning of the seller's field all the way to your pit that you have to get to. That's considered ara achrisi. That's another piece of land. So you bought a pit, you didn't buy this other piece of land. Happens to be that the other piece of land is a pathway how to get to the pit. But a pathway, you can imagine you bought a, imagine you bought a, I don't know, you bought like someone's hot tub or something. You bought a jacuzzi, right, on someone's, back porch. So you don't acquire his whole driveway through his 3 security fences and through his house. You bought one thing. How are you going to get there? Good question. But that's going to have to be a new purchase. So too here, if you buy a pit of water, so it's in someone else's backyard, you have to now acquire a walkway how to get there, a special pathway how to get there. However, Oru V'Salo Yeshlo, but yeah, in Oru V'Salo, that much you have. Why? So that's not considered apparently another field. They added no.
It's probably like the room around the pit.
Well, they added a word here. The side adds in a word. So derech ein lo da'arach risi, but oru v'salo yesh lo. Oh, it's all still part of the question, right? It's all still he has no path, but a field he has. Derech ein lo da'arach risi, but oru v'salo yesh lo. So how could he have this whole area to pick fruits with his basket? Okay, it's all part of the question. The Rashbam explains like you don't need this area so much. He said you can climb up the tree and collect your fruits, or when they fall down, you can pick them up. You can pick them up. You don't need this large amount of area. I guess it's it's a big area to have to stand there with a basket. You don't have to stand with a basket. You can climb up the tree yourself, or wait till the fruit falls down. So, okay, so let's answer. What's the answer? Oh, Reb Zeira medivei Rabbeinu nilmad shloshahu de'ein lo derech, but ha shnayim yesh lo. So, since we learn from Rabbi Lazar, who explained his reasoning that a pathway is considered arach risi, right? If a pathway if the area next to a tree where you have your basket, if that's comparable to acquiring a whole pathway on the way to a pit, so that sounds like counterintuitive. Why? Because when do you acquire land by trees? Only when you've acquired 3 trees. So if you're viewing the area as its own entity, the area around the trees as its own entity, that would only make sense by 3 trees. So the Gemara is saying, Shloshahu de'ein lo derech. It sounds like for 3 trees, you would not acquire a derech, but hashnayim yeshlo. It sounds like by 3 trees. I'm sorry. By 3 trees. So it sounds like only when someone gets 3 trees, he has not acquired a path to the trees, because the trees are on someone else's land. But hashnayim yeshlo, if you only bought 2 trees, so then you would acquire a path. Why? The amarle ba'ara didach kaimi, meaning when you buy 3 trees, so it's like you buy your own little field of trees. So over there you would have to acquire a new path. But if you just bought 2 trees, so what you're basically doing is you said, I bought 2 trees in your land, so I have no other way to get there. When you buy 3 trees, like you purchase your own plot of land. Now you need to go figure out how to get to your new plot of land. But if you only bought 2 trees, I bought 2 trees in your backyard, so obviously, you're allowing me to go through your backyard to get there. Yeah, it is strange, right? Yeah. Well, it's like a little bit similar to when you have the two trees that shade over the seller's property, right? We said that when you have 2 trees that shade over the seller's property, even if the shade is not good for the seller, he has no right to cut down your trees, because that was like the unspoken deal. I'm buying trees with no land under it, So you basically have to supply me, the necessities for my tree. So too here, I bought 2 trees with no land under it. So it's understood that I'm going to acquire a pathway how to get there. Yeah. Amar le Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak le Rava. Lema, maybe say Rabbi Lazar le slay the Shmuel Rabbi. Maybe Rabbi Lazar does not hold of Shmuel, his Rabbi. So what did Shmuel say? The Amar Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Akiva. Back to our Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva is the one who held when you sell things, you sell it ba'ayin yafa. The Amar mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher, which means that when you would sell your a pit to somebody, you would sell a pathway to the pit also. It's the rabbis who argue to sell that you only sold ba'ayin ra. With the more stingy eye, you only sold that which you sold. You didn't sell more than that. So if you're saying now that Rabbi Lazar does not acquire a pathway how to get there, how to get to the pit, and therefore he asked on our case of trees, it would seem like Rabbi Lazar does not agree with his Rebbe, who sides with Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Lazar just asked, right? Said, how could it be that you have the area of with the basket, but a pathway you don't have, but an area of the basket you do have? That would mean that Rabbi Lazar does not agree with Shmuel, who sided with Rabbi Akiva, that said you sell ba'ayin yafa. Because if you sell ba'ayin yafa, then you have no question over here. Ba'ayin yafa is easy. Ba'ayin yafa is you acquire, even by a reservoir of water, you've acquired the pathway how to get there. So therefore, there's no problem here to acquire a little bit of land around the trees to be able to pick in a nice, calming manner and put them into the basket. Since Rabbi Lazar asked that question, it must be he holds that by a reservoir of water, you do not acquire the pathway how to get there. Therefore, he was bothered by, why do you acquire the area around the trees to put into your basket? That we're asking, that would mean that Rabbi Lazar's Rebbe Shmuel said halachas like Rabbi Akiva. And that would mean that Rabbi Lazar is not going with his Rebbe, which would be seem to be difficult for us. So, Amarle, no. Lo metukma masnisin Rabbi Akiva. Our mission is anyways not going like Rabbi Akiva. How do you know? Mimai, midikatani higdilu yishpa. From the fact that it says that when you acquire a tree, 3 trees, if that tree grows and now shades the original seller's property, in the case of 3 trees, the seller can go and cut down your tree. When you acquire 2 trees, no, when you acquire 3 trees, the seller can go and cut down your tree because it's blocking his shade from his property. Now, what does that have to do with Rabbi Akiva, who says you sell with a generous eye? If our Mrs. Rabbi Akiva, amai yishper, how can the seller go and cut down the branch of your tree? Ha'omer mocher b'ayin yafa mocher. He says you sell with a generous eye, which would mean in this case, when I sold you 3 trees, I'm also not going to, I at least sold you, the area that your tree might cover over. That area I'm not going to go and cut down. I would even sell you a path to my sister in my backyard. For sure, that little area that's hovering over, that your tree's shading, that for sure, the seller's not going to retain the rights to cut down your tree. It's your tree after all. So, Amarle, no. Let's limit Rabbi Akiva to the case of the bore, the pit, the cistern, and the reservoir. There he'll say, you sell ba'ayin yafa. What's the difference between a pit of water that he will agree that you can have the pathway also to the pit, versus our Mishnah, where if your tree grows, if you have 3 trees and you get the land under it, and now it's growing too far, somehow Rabbi Akiva is going to agree here that the seller can go and cut off a branch of your tree. So, when it comes to borvedus, so walking to your reservoir of water will not damage the ground at all. But gabe ilon mishamisle, you're always going to be walking in the area on the ground next to the tree. That's going to ruin that might ruin, that might ruin the field area. If you're always around, you might cause the earth to weaken. A pathway to a bore. So when a guy sells a pit, so he's not worried about, the pit's going to get ruined now because you're walking there on a walkway. But when you're always by the area of my ground next to your tree, and you keep stomping on my ground, so then that might be damaging to my land. So therefore, by this case, I'm not going to sell to you the ayin yafa. Especially because in this case, if your tree grows too much, it's going to shade over my property. It's going to block the sunlight from coming through. That's damaging to me. So when it's damaging to me, I don't sell the ayin yafa. But when it's just a pit and you want a pathway how to get to the pit, so there I'm happy to sell you the pathway also. But I'm not happy to sell you a tree that in the event that's going to shade and block the sun from coming to my property, that's damaging for me. So in that case, he will retain the rights to cut down the tree. So Milo Moder Rabbi Akiva, does Rabbi Akiva not agree? Be'ilan hanota l'toch sadeh chavero she kotzetz mole mardea ma'al gabe machrisha. Does he not agree that when you have a tree that's planted in someone else's field, that you have to always make sure that you cut down enough of your field that if he wants to come with his plow, then he has room to come with his plow. Okay, let me just double check that's the case. Yeah, the Mishnah earlier says, when you have branches of a tree that extend over a neighbor's field, the neighbor can go and cut off the lower branches. Why? To let his plow go, a certain height, however big the plow is. So the neighbor whose tree yours is in, he's allowed to go cut off your tree to ensure that his plow can go through, and not get stuck. So similarly, because if he didn't do that, his plow would be damaged. So too in our case, the same way Rabbi Akiva agrees with that Mishnah that there are circumstances where you buy a tree in someone else's property, the other person's allowed to cut down part of your trees to allow for his plow. So too in our Mishnah, when you buy a tree in someone else's property, the owner's allowed to go and cut down the tree if it's damaging. So at the end of the day, Rabbi Gleizer does not disagree with his Rebbe, Shmuel, who held like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva that always says you sell the ayin yafa, he only sells the ayin yafa when there's no damage done to the seller. But in the event that the seller might be damaged, either because it grows too much and now the plow can't go through, or if your trees grow and they're too big and they're shading over neighbor's property, so in that case, Rabbi Akiva will agree that the seller retains the rights to do whatever he needs in order to not damage his property, whether it's cutting down the tree enough that the plow can go through, or whether it's cutting down the branches so that his field will get the adequate sunlight. To be continued.